I never expected her to look at me that way, as if I was already a part of her story, long before I even understood my place in it. The cafe was glowing that evening, its warm lights spilling out into the rain-slick streets like little fragments of comfort. Outside, umbrellas shuffled past, hurried footsteps splashing through shallow puddles. But inside there was a stillness that felt almost protective. I had come here by chance just to escape the downpour, but the moment I stepped in, I knew this wasn't going to be just another quiet night. She was sitting by the window, her presence as steady as the rain tapping against the glass. A book rested in her hands, open but not often read. She turned the pages slowly, as if savoring them, and once in a while she would pause to gaze outside, her expression thoughtful, almost wistful. There was nothing loud about her, nothing that demanded attention. Yet I found myself unable to look away. It wasn't simply the way she looked, though she carried herself with the kind of beauty that doesn't fade with time, the kind that deepens, like the richness of an aged wine. Her hair, loose and touched by faint strands of silver, framed her face in soft waves. But it was her eyes that caught me. They had a quiet weight to them, as though they had seen both joy and storms, and learned to hold both with grace. I ordered a coffee and sat at a table across from her, pretending to read messages on my phone. The truth was, I was studying her the way one studies something they don't want to disturb. The way her fingers curled gently around the cup of tea, the way she leaned back in her chair, as if she had nothing to prove to the world. She didn't fidget, didn't rush. She simply existed, fully, calmly, like someone who had learned to befriend silence. And yet, there was something else. A vulnerability that revealed itself only in small flashes. The way she pressed her lips together when her gaze lingered too long outside, or the way she blinked as if pulling herself back from a memory. That contrast, confidence on the surface, softness hidden beneath, pulled me in before I even realized it. I should have looked away, buried myself in my coffee, but my eyes betrayed me. They kept drifting back, and once when I thought she was still lost in her book, she looked up. Our eyes met for the briefest moment. Not long enough for a smile, not long enough to mean anything to her, but long enough for me to feel a rush of warmth, like the quiet shock of stepping into sunlight after the rain. I didn't know her name. I didn't know her story. But something told me this wasn't the kind of encounter you walked away from unchanged. That fleeting glance carried more weight than any conversation I'd had in weeks, and I sat there, heart strangely unsteady, realizing that the rain might not have led me here by accident at all. It started with something small, something that would have been easy to overlook if I hadn't been watching her so closely. She had set her scarf, a soft gray one, across the corner of the table while she read. When she reached for her cup of tea, the fabric slid, drifting toward the floor. Without thinking, I pushed my chair back and caught it just before it touched the ground. She looked up, surprised, her eyes locking onto mine with a quick intensity that made my chest tighten. I straightened and held the scarf out to her, and for the first time, I saw her smile. It wasn't rehearsed or polite. It was quiet, genuine, the kind that revealed a flicker of softness beneath her composed exterior. "Thank you," she said, her voice low, even, but carrying a warmth that lingered. I handed her the scarf, and in that small exchange, our fingers brushed. It was nothing, barely a second of contact, but I felt it. The warmth of her skin against mine, delicate yet steady, lingered longer than it should have. She seemed to notice it too. Her gaze flickered, and though she pulled her hand back, her expression softened in a way that told me she wasn't entirely untouched by it either. I tried to play it casual, to smile without staring, but the words that came out of my mouth betrayed the truth. "It suits you," I said quietly, nodding at the scarf. Her brow arched slightly, amused. The scarf. Heat rose to my face, but I didn't look away. "No, the way you wear it. Like it belongs." There was a pause, then a small laugh escaped her, low, controlled, but with just enough warmth to draw me closer in spirit. She tilted her head slightly, studying me. I could feel the weight of her gaze, not sharp or intimidating, but careful, almost curious. "You're observant," she said. It sounded less like an observation and more like a test, as if she wanted to see how I'd respond. Or maybe I just noticed things that matter. I replied before I could stop myself. The silence that followed wasn't heavy. It stretched between us like a thread, delicate but undeniable. She sipped her tea, eyes never leaving mine, and for a moment it felt as though the rest of the cafe had disappeared. When she finally looked away, placing her cup gently back onto the saucer, I realized I'd been holding my breath. My pulse still raced, though nothing dramatic had happened. Just a scarf, a smile, and a few words. Yet somehow, it felt like more. The scarf was back on her lap now, safe, but the moment it had created lingered between us. I went back to my coffee, pretending to scroll through my phone, but every sense was heightened. The faint citrus in her perfume, the rhythm of her turning another page, the memory of her hand brushing mine. And though we hadn't exchanged names, something had already shifted. She wasn't just the woman by the window anymore. She was someone I wanted to know. By the time the cafe lights dimmed, the rain had thinned into a soft drizzle. Most of the customers had already left, and she stood by the door, folding her book into her bag and draping that gray scarf around her shoulders. I found myself moving before I'd even decided to, stepping out at the same time she did. The air outside was cool and damp, carrying the earthy scent of wet pavement. Street lamps glowed like halos on the slick asphalt, and the city seemed quieter, as if the rain had pressed it into silence. She opened a small umbrella, glanced at me, and then, with a slight tilt of her head, asked, "Which way are you going?" Her question caught me off guard, but I managed to answer, pointing down the same street she was already facing. She smiled faintly, as though amused at the coincidence, and we began walking side by side. At first, it was simple conversation. She asked what I did, and I told her. She listened without interruption, her gaze forward, but her attention unmistakably fixed on me. When she spoke of her own life, her words carried weight. She told me about her work, how it challenged her, how it had shaped her into someone who no longer rushed through things. There was pride in her voice, but also restraint, as though she wasn't accustomed to speaking about herself so openly. I listened more carefully than I ever had with anyone. Every detail felt important. The way her tone softened when she spoke about music she loved. The slight pause before she mentioned the struggles she'd faced. Not in detail, but in a way that told me they were there, etched beneath her composure. I wanted to ask more, but I didn't. Some silences weren't meant to be filled just yet. There was a teasing moment, too. When I admitted that I didn't often walk this late at night, she gave me a sidelong glance, the corner of her mouth curving. "Maybe you needed a reason to," she said. Her words carried more weight than the lightness of her tone suggested. I couldn't stop the small smile that tugged at me in return. Our shoulders brushed once, then again, and neither of us moved away. The closeness felt natural, unforced, as if the narrow sidewalk had conspired to draw us together. Each accidental touch sent a quiet rush through me. Not overwhelming, just steady like a heartbeat I was learning to notice. As we reached the end of the street, she stopped beneath a lamppost. The glow wrapped around her like something meant only for her. She looked at me, then really looked, her eyes searching mine in a way that left me almost breathless. "You listen well," she said softly. "Not many people do." I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded, holding her gaze a moment longer than I should have. And as we continued walking side by side in the softened rain, I realized I didn't just want to know her story. I wanted to be a part of it. When we reached her building, I expected the night to end there, a polite goodbye, maybe a smile if I was lucky. But instead, she paused at the door, her hand resting lightly on the brass handle. She looked at me, her expression thoughtful, as if weighing something. Then, with a gentle tilt of her head, she asked, "Would you like to come in for tea? Just for a little while." Her voice was calm, but there was a softness underneath, a quiet invitation that made my chest tighten. I nodded before I could think too much about it, and she led the way. The stairwell was quiet, the faint echo of our footsteps rising together. Her apartment was on the second floor, and when she opened the door, a wave of warmth greeted me. Not just the physical warmth of the room, but the atmosphere itself, lived in, comforting. A faint scent of lavender drifted through the air, blending with something herbal like dried chamomile. Her home felt like her, composed, graceful, but touched with personal detail. Bookshelves lined the wall, their spines worn. A record player sat by the window, and soft golden light pooled from a lamp draped with a thin fabric shade. She set her umbrella aside, unwrapped her scarf, and moved with a kind of effortless grace, as though every gesture was measured but natural. "Make yourself comfortable," she said, motioning toward the couch. I sat down, feeling the softness of the cushions sink slightly beneath me. She moved to the kitchen, and the faint clink of porcelain cups followed. I watched her silhouette against the dim glow, realizing how easily she seemed to fit in her own space, like she belonged everywhere she stood. When she returned with a tray, she set it down on the low table in front of us. The cups steamed gently, carrying the subtle fragrance of green tea. She poured with steady hands, then settled beside me, not too close but not far either. The couch dipped slightly under her weight, and I felt the quiet electricity of being near her again. For a while we just talked. At first it was small things, books, music, little fragments of daily life. But as the minutes passed, the conversation slowed, and silence began to weave itself between our words. It wasn't uncomfortable. If anything, it felt heavier than words, like something important was taking shape in the quiet. She leaned back, her eyes lingering on me. It wasn't a casual glance. It was deliberate, as if she was studying me, trying to see past the surface. My heart raced under her gaze, though I did my best to hold it steady. At one point, her knee brushed mine lightly. Neither of us shifted away. The contact was subtle, almost accidental, but it sent a ripple through me. I could feel the warmth of it, the quiet weight of what it meant. In that dimly lit room, with the scent of lavender and tea in the air, I felt something I hadn't expected when I had walked into that cafe hours earlier. A closeness was forming, fragile, tentative, but undeniable. And though neither of us said it aloud, I knew she felt it too. The hours slipped by more quietly than I realized. The tea had long since cooled, yet neither of us moved to end the night. There was a rhythm to our conversation now, one that felt less like exchanging words and more like uncovering small pieces of each other. She spoke slowly, deliberately, as though each thought she shared had to pass through careful gates before leaving her lips. At one point, she leaned back, her hand resting on the arm of the couch. Her gaze lowered to her cup, tracing the rim with her finger, and the air around us seemed to thicken. "You know," she began softly, "sometimes I think it's easier to talk to someone who hasn't lived my exact life. Someone who won't already think they know the ending to my story." Her words caught me off guard. There was something fragile in the way she said it. Not weak, but tender, as though it cost her something to admit. I didn't answer right away. I just let the silence hold her words, giving them the space they deserved. Finally, I asked gently, "Do you feel like people expect you to be someone you're not?" She looked at me then, and in her eyes I saw something I hadn't expected: fear. Not overwhelming, but quiet, layered under all that poise she carried so well. "Sometimes," she admitted, "people see the surface, the confidence, the calm. They don't see how uncertain it feels beneath. They don't see how much I wonder if letting someone in would be a mistake." Her voice wavered just slightly at the end, and in that moment, she didn't look untouchable anymore. She looked human, beautifully, achingly human. Without thinking, I shifted slightly closer, enough so that my hand rested near hers on the couch. I didn't take her hand, not yet, but I let the nearness speak. She noticed. Her eyes dropped to the small space between us, then back to mine. Slowly, cautiously, she let her hand rest over mine. The contact was light, her fingers trembling just a little. That slight tremor made my heart tighten more than any bold gesture could have. It told me she was letting me into a place she didn't often show. "I'm afraid," she whispered, almost to herself. "Afraid of being seen only for the years I've lived, instead of the person I am." I wanted to tell her she had nothing to fear, that I already saw her, fully, more than I'd seen anyone in a long time. But the words stuck in my throat. Somehow, I knew reassurance wasn't what she needed. What she needed was presence. So instead, I squeezed her hand gently, steadying the tremble. We sat like that for a long moment. The hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, the tick of a clock on the wall, and her hand warm against mine. And though neither of us said more, the silence was louder than words. It was the kind of silence that carried trust. The silence between us lingered, not empty but alive, charged with all the words neither of us had yet spoken. Her hand still rested over mine, no longer trembling, her grip gentle but certain. I could feel the warmth of her skin radiating into me, grounding me in that moment. It struck me how natural it felt, how right. She shifted slightly, turning toward me, her scarf sliding down her shoulder as she moved. The lamp's glow softened the edges of her face, catching the faint silver strands in her hair, making them glisten like threads of light. Her eyes searched mine, steady but vulnerable, as though she was weighing something heavy inside her. "I'm not sure you understand," she began, her voice low, almost hesitant. She paused, as if deciding how much she dared to reveal. "Being here with you, talking like this, it isn't simple for me." I swallowed, my chest tightening. I wanted to tell her that I knew, that I felt it too, the pull, the hesitation, the unspoken questions. But before I could form the words, she leaned a little closer, her breath brushing my cheek, her voice barely above a whisper. "You don't even realize what you mean to me yet." The words hung in the air, soft but powerful, pressing into me with a weight I hadn't expected. My heart stumbled in my chest, and for a moment, all I could do was sit there, caught between disbelief and the quiet surge of something I didn't have a name for. Her eyes flickered, as though she regretted saying it out loud, but she didn't pull away. Instead, her fingers tightened just slightly over mine, holding on as if she needed the anchor. I didn't answer right away. The truth was I didn't know how. My throat was dry, my thoughts tangled, and yet every instinct in me screamed not to break the moment. So I stayed still, letting the silence do what words couldn't. I could feel her breath between us, the faint tremor in her exhale, the closeness that made the rest of the world fade away. She looked at me like she was waiting, not for reassurance, not for promises, but for me to simply understand. And though I didn't fully understand, not yet, something inside me shifted. I realized she wasn't just letting me into her home or her evening. She was letting me into a part of herself she didn't often show. My hand turned slightly beneath hers, enough to lace my fingers through hers. It was a small gesture, almost tentative, but the way her eyes softened told me it was the right one. Neither of us spoke again. The words had already been said, and nothing could add to them. All that remained was the quiet thrum of connection, the steady rhythm of two people sitting too close, holding on to something neither wanted to let go of. And in that silence, I felt it, not just the pull of attraction, but the beginning of something deeper. The night gave way slowly, as if reluctant to leave us. At some point, the tea had gone cold, and our conversation had dissolved into stretches of silence. Not the awkward kind, but the kind that feels like rest, like two people simply existing in the same rhythm. I don't remember when I leaned back against the couch, or when she shifted closer, but by the time the first hints of dawn touched the curtains, her head rested lightly against my shoulder. I sat perfectly still, not wanting to break the spell, afraid that even the smallest movement might pull her away. The room was quiet, save for the faint ticking of the clock and the distant hum of the city waking outside. Through the sheer curtains, the first traces of morning painted the sky in soft gold and pale rose. That light fell across her hair, warming the strands, making them glow like a halo. I looked down at her, and for a moment, everything else fell away. Her face was calm, her eyes closed, lips parted just slightly, as though the night's weight had finally eased from her. She looked nothing like the woman who had carried herself so carefully in the cafe. Here, she wasn't guarded, wasn't measured. She was simply herself. And I realized then that I wanted to be the person she could be that way with. My arm shifted almost instinctively, resting along the back of the couch. The movement stirred her just enough that her head pressed a little more firmly against me. She didn't move away. If anything, she nestled closer, her hand brushing lightly against my chest, a touch so subtle yet so grounding it made my heart ache. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding, and in the stillness, her words from the night before echoed in me. "You don't even realize what you mean to me yet." She was right. I didn't fully understand it. Not yet. But I felt the truth of it in the way she leaned into me, in the trust of her closeness, in the quiet bond we'd built without rushing, without forcing. I didn't need to answer her with declarations or promises. Not now. What mattered was being here, steady and present, letting the beginning of something new unfold without fear. As the sunlight grew, spilling across the room, I reached up with my free hand and gently brushed a strand of hair from her face. The simple touch felt like a vow, unspoken but certain. She stirred slightly, her eyes fluttering open, and for a fleeting second, she looked at me not with surprise, but with something softer, something that made my chest tighten. She smiled faintly, then closed her eyes again, trusting me enough to stay as she was. And in that moment, I knew, maybe I didn't realize yet what I meant to her. But I was ready to find out, slowly, quietly, one sunrise at a time.